Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today we're going to be looking at the winter storm that could be affecting parts of the Northwest and then into parts of the northern plains, including Nebraska, both the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, the UP of Michigan, Montana, and Wyoming. All those areas could actually be affected with some heavy snowfall, actually in some areas over 2 feet of snowfall, some models are saying. And that could even extend down into Kansas. Parts of northwest Kansas could get into some of this snowfall. We start off at the National Weather Service, where we have in those in that medium shade of blue, you're going to be seeing frost advisories. So your temperatures will be getting down into the 30s, the low 30s. So you'll probably see a widespread frost tonight. That includes parts of the northeast United States, and then also for parts of the northern half of Michigan, and then the UP of Michigan, and then as well also northwest Kansas, southeast Nebraska or southwest Nebraska, and then eastern part of Colorado. And then we have a freeze warning in effect for parts of New York State. Most of upstate New York has a freeze warning. That's where your temperatures could get into the 20s. That also includes parts of southern Vermont, western Massachusetts, and then northern half of northern third of Pennsylvania, and then the northern half of Michigan. And then also for a couple of mountaintops in Colorado and Utah could be seeing some freeze warnings. And then in those pinks, you have red flag warnings, and that's for parts of California, Wyoming, and Colorado. And then in those browns, those are wind advisories. That's where you could have guests 30 to 40 miles per hour, 40 mile per hour today, and then into tomorrow. So let's get right into it with our temperatures, our low temperatures over the next couple of days. So we start off here today. This is what our low temperatures were for today. You see the northeast was in the 30s, the upper 30s, low 40s. Some areas getting down into the mid to low 30s. Then we have 40s and 50s widespread for much of the northern United States, and then 70s for the southern United States. You see this push of colder air that comes along with the front, and that's going to lead to conditions 40 to 50 degrees for low temperatures over the Midwest. And then we see that front continue to push on some precipitation associated with that front. By Monday, you're seeing it all the way into the western mid-Atlantic and into parts of Ohio is almost all through this front. Pennsylvania is getting into it, and then much of interior northeast is already associated with that front. Now, as we move on 84 hours out onto Tuesday, we see pretty widespread cold conditions, widespread 50 to 40 degrees for low temperature. And then Wednesday next week, you'll be seeing this next cold front, and this is going to be much stronger. Now, this is associated with the low pressure, so the low pressure is around here, and you're seeing those cooler temperatures, and this is going to be associated with that snowfall that we were talking about. So that snowfall is going to be right around the Midwest and parts of the higher elevations of Montana and Wyoming. And then as we move on to Thursday, you see that cold front continue to move through. Temperatures in the 30s and 20s widespread behind this cold front, and then even some single digits and below freezing, up to 20 degrees below freezing over some mountaintops in Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. And then 156 hours out Friday, that cold front continues, and it's almost reached Chicago, and then it's getting into the southeast. Now here's your average first day of snowfall. I just wanted to point this out because you don't usually see snowfall this time of year, and it's looking highly likely because we have almost all models agreeing that we're going to see some sort of snowfall over the Midwestern United States. And you see in those purples, that's November 1st to November 15th. You usually see your first snowfall November 5th to November 1st to November 5th, 15th. And then some areas in here actually are down into that darker purple. That would be November 16th through November 30th. So almost all of these areas don't see their snowfall until at least November 1st. Some areas in here get it by October, especially parts of northern Minnesota, some areas in North Dakota, and then especially some higher elevations in Montana, most of Wyoming as well. They usually see their first snowfall by October, but still, we're still in the first half. We're still in the first half of the month. We're still in the first 10 days of October. We didn't even reach the halfway point yet to be seeing snowfall this widespread over these type of areas that don't usually see it this early on. So we're going to start off with the European model. We're going to see what it's looking like. So as we move on to Monday, you see it's kind of entering through British Columbia. It was a wave of moisture coming through the Gulf of Alaska and then getting pulled down into British Columbia. And as we keep on moving on, and you can see how it's already into Montana by Wednesday, widespread, even into some of those lower elevations in Montana, still seeing a couple of flurries of snowfall. Now we're going to zoom in on the Midwest here, and you see how that system moves through, and this is over parts of North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, Montana, and this is all moving through by Wednesday. Now into Thursday morning, you're going to be seeing heavy snowfall in those dark blues over parts of Nebraska and South Dakota, and it's moving into Minnesota right now. And then you even see down here, that is Kansas right there. Down there is Kansas, and you're actually seeing some snowfall down in Kansas. And then Minnesota, the western half of Minnesota, getting into some snowfall. And then almost all of Minnesota's in some snowfall by Friday. And then a band of colder air moves through right here. So this is the back side of the system. So if we actually move it back a little bit, you see how this is the back side of the system. The western and northwestern side of the system usually gets the cold air. The cold air is usually behind the system, so that's why you're seeing this rainfall here. It's not cold enough to be seeing the snowfall yet until the system moves through, and then you get into the backside over parts of Minnesota and South Dakota, and even parts of Iowa getting in on some of this snowfall and some flurries. And then you see this banding feature over parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin, and it kind of intensifies, moves south a little bit, and then it'll move out. And you see this really, it's a long banding feature. This is already over northern Ontario by this point, and you're still seeing the snowfall move through into parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin. And then just a couple of flurries left. So here's the wide view of the entire United States and the snowfall. You see, we're going to actually zoom in. So this is over Montana. Right here is Montana. Down there is Wyoming. And then here's Idaho. So Idaho seeing around 6 to even 12 inches in some of those areas. And that's in the purples. The purples is 6 to 12 inches. And then 12 to 24 inches is in those pinks, and then blue, anywhere in the blues, 2 to 6 inches, and if you're in a gray, you're just half an inch to about 2 inches. Now we move on to the Midwestern United States, and you see over we'll start from the southern area. We see all the way down into northern Colorado, the western half of Nebraska, and Nebraska and South Dakota, you're seeing most of this snowfall here, and you're seeing about 3 to 6 inches widespread over these areas, which is pretty unheard of for this time of year. It does happen once in a while, but not too often. And then we have about 2 feet in some of these areas in the northern half of Minnesota, basically. Even Minneapolis and the Twin Cities getting in on about 4 to 6 inches of snowfall. Now we're going to look at your GFS model from Pivotal Weather, which is a great website if you do want to check them out. They provide a lot of weather information there, and I highly recommend that you look at it. It's free, and they provide a lot of great information. So we start off here, it's over Montana, and then even getting into parts of North Dakota. And as we move on a little bit, you see how it moves southward. Your low pressure right over here, 995 millibars, and it's quickly intensifying. Now, as we zoom in on the Midwest, you see over parts of Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, and then even into parts of Minnesota, you're getting some heavy snowfall. And then moderate snowfall continues all the way into Minnesota by about Saturday. And then as we keep on, not Saturday, I mean Friday, and as we keep on moving on, it kind of moves southward. We see most of the models have this system go northward out of the frame or out of the picture and then move southward again back into frame, and you see this really strong system, 985 millibars, which is pretty intense for this time of year. It's a pretty intense system, and then it kind of moves off and we just see some flurries. So we'll start off in the northwest, and we see about 12 inches of snow over some of those mountain tops, about widespread around 1 to 5 inches, and then some areas seeing 6 to 12 inches, especially over those higher elevations. Now, as we move on to the Midwest, you see parts of northern Nebraska, most of South Dakota, most of North Dakota, and almost all of Minnesota, and some of the northern half of Wisconsin, getting in on at least 1 inch of snowfall. And this is going to be some wet, heavy snowfall, because most of these areas didn't even reach 32 degrees in the system. Most of these areas were around 33 to 34 degrees, but since some areas in the upper levels of the atmosphere were cold enough, it didn't have time to turn into a raindrop, and as it was moving, as that area of moisture was moving through the atmosphere. Let's kind of draw this out. So it's over here's the cloud right here, and right here we'll just say it's 32 degrees, and down at the surface, let's say it's 34 degrees, and once it's 32 degrees up at the higher areas of the atmosphere, but as it's moving through, it does not have time to, as it reaches the ground, it does not have time to turn into a raindrop again. So it's gonna go down as wet, heavy snowfall, and it's almost a raindrop, but it's still snowfall, and that's why you're seeing all these snow totals, even though most of these areas did not get into the right around or below the 32-degree mark. And you see it widespread around a foot plus over the northern third of Minnesota. So this is a significant snowfall producer for this time of year. Now, we're going to look at the Canadian model, finally, the GEM model, or the CMC model. Has a couple of nicknames. And 96 hours out, or Tuesday of next week, you're seeing the system moving through Montana. As we move on to a zoomed-in view of the Midwest, you're seeing it move through. By Wednesday night, you're seeing it over parts of the Dakotas. And I want to point out that the GEM model does have a more westerly west bias. It wants to put this system more to the west, as North Dakota wasn't really seeing snowfall. It was really South Dakota, because South Dakota was picking up on some banding features, but North Dakota was really just to west. It was right in between all that snowfall, but wasn't really picking up on it itself. So if the GEM model does play out as it's showing, then North Dakota will really be in for a lot of snowfall, and much of Minnesota won't have any snowfall, pretty much. Only parts of extreme northwest Minnesota, like these areas, will have some snowfall. And you see how it's really covering most of the Dakotas, but it's not really, that cool air isn't making a push into Minnesota, or, it's not really making a push into Minnesota, not even, a quarter of Minnesota is in snowfall. And then, really, as it starts to move out, and those cold bands kind of move through, you're going to be seeing those snowfall totals right around Saturday or Friday of next week. Now, as it moves on, you kind of see how it does do that thing where it moves south and then moves north again. And but the positioning of this low pressure is different than all of them. What I'm thinking is happening is that it wants to build a high pressure closer to this system, which is leading to the low pressure not being able to go further to the east, so it's pushing it further to the west, and that's what I think is happening. And the other models were having the low pressure right around over parts of of Ontario, southern Ontario, kind of close to Toronto, which was right here, and it was kind of southern Ontario, but right now it's I believe in Alberta, Canada, or Manitoba, and it's kind of way to the west of all of these other models. And as we move on, just a couple of flurries, and they kind of turn into some rain showers, and then the system moves back down again. So it's kind of a wild ride from the gem model, moves up and down and up and down. But you see, anywhere in those blue lines, that's 32 degrees. So most of these areas by this point are 32 degrees or less. And then finally, everything pretty much turns into rain showers. Here's what the gem model is showing for snowfall, at least. And it's showing about a foot or so for parts of eastern North Dakota and western northwestern parts of Minnesota, and then widespread about 5 to 6 inches, or and then a couple more areas in the 1 to 3 inches area, 1 to 3 inches. But you see, Nebraska isn't really getting in on this too much. Minnesota, southern Minnesota, where most people in Minnesota actually live, the population center down near southern Minnesota, they're not really seeing any snowfall, just about an inch of snowfall, so nothing really that's going to accumulate. Now, if you did enjoy that video, please consider subscribing and leaving a like on this video. It really supports the channel, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. That was Eli the Weather Guy, and bye.